Hello, and welcome to the first course on the golden mean for the conversation of our generation. And we are going to be diving in today to the Nichomachean ethics, and we're going to be looking at book one. We're going to break out the entire book of Aristotle's Ethics into several sections, and we're going to just go through it book by book. That way, we can digest each piece of this, because I think what was troublesome for me in reading these works and why I want to go through these with you in these courses is to break it out and make it digestible. And as you're following along reading with this, so definitely check out the resources, the PDF version, or buy the book. I have links on in this area where you can buy this, or buy the book. But I recommend you have that so you can read the chapter or the book. It's kind of what they call a book is almost like a long chapter for us, really, right? Because they're writing the books on scrolls. And so it's kind of like the Bible, right? A book in the Bible is like a lot of times it's a long chapter of a regular book, right? So that's what it's basically you're looking at. And so we're breaking it out that way so we can follow along and go through this together and pull out insights and make sure that we understand the material. And we're not just reading it to say we've read it. We're not just reading it for kind of that pride of saying, oh, I've read all of Aristotle's works and I've read everything Plato has to offer. But we're going through and understanding and actually digesting the information and making sure that we can do that. Like we can spit the information back out and use it in argumentation and actually draw on it in our lives. So that's what we're doing. That's why I have a little bit of a long intro to this part of the course, but we are going to dive into the topic here in a moment. I just wanted to make sure to cover that so that people understand what's going on. And if you're watching this, there's a good chance that you're not actually subscribed to the course yet. So definitely make sure you buy the course so that you can go through this work. We're going to go through Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. We're going to go through the Analects and the Doctrine of the Mean by Confucius, Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, and more. There will be other parts as well to this, but definitely those four. And I recommend just buying this course so that you can fully enjoy everything that it has to offer. I think this is the liberal education that we need to really be pushing out there and instilling in our culture. And each of us needs to take up the burden of learning it for ourselves and actually understanding it. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's dive in now to, or I guess today I say like I'm talking on my podcast, but really it's whenever you're listening to this and going through the course. So let's dive through this then. So we're going to be talking about the course of the golden mean, and this is class number 1, the Nichomachean Ethics, book 1. I swear by the end of this course, I will know how to pronounce that word and do it correctly. And no, I don't. I do not promise that. I have, I just know that is not going to probably happen. So let's go ahead and dive into, well, let's start with an overview of what this is. This is Aristotle's work on ethics. This is the precursor to his work on politics. And it's really a series of lectures is what this is. It's sort of like if Jordan Peterson was giving his lectures and he's going around talking about these things and he distills it down into his book, 12 Rules for Life. That's what Aristotle did here, right? Is he was giving these lectures and he distilled it down into these writings, and they're preserved as under the Nichomachean ethics and politics, and they kind of flow together. And so we're going to go through the ethics here. And so sorry about the beeping noises. My computer is not trying to let me go slides without clicking. So the first chapter is on teleology. And so what we're going to find here is that actions and objects have ends, right? And the end is what the object is naturally ordered towards. And what we find in that is that these ends are inherent to the thing itself. So, for instance, the end of medicine is health. That is what it's for. Is the reason you practice medicine is to put someone in good health. The end of boat building is to have a boat. the end of generalship or military strategy is to have victory in war. And these goods and ends can be subordinate to one another. So Aristotle gives the example that bridle making is subordinate to horsemanship because it's a part of it. The reason you make a bridle is so that you can be a better horseman, right? And in modern world, right, making a tire, making mirrors, making an engine is subordinate to building a car. So goods and these good ends and these goods are in a sort of hierarchy ordered towards something greater. And so that's what you're going to find in chapter 1 is that discussion of teleology and that explanation of teleology. The next is that and so things achievable by action have some end that we wish for because of itself. And so that's the good that we should search for. So I should go back on teleology. There is such a thing as something that is an end in and of itself, that is just good, and it is something that we seek because we should seek it. And that's the type of good that we should be searching for ultimately. We should be looking for that ultimate good that is sought for the sake of having it for itself. And so what he says then in chapter 2 is that political science is the highest science. And it's not this modern political science that is that's very bean countery, that's very much how do I go about making sure I'm pulling all the right levers, and kind of this sort of liberal idea that we have today. Really what he's talking about is an inquiry into the best way of life. It's a search for the way of living that will create the most happiness, and it seeks the human good and the good of the city. And so that's what he's looking at, is really this philosophical inquiry to how do we create the greatest ability for people to actually search for happiness. That's what political science is about. It's not the Fauci and the kind of economical look at what we have today of the political sphere of tax cuts and this and that. It's really how does the state serve the individual in flourishing, helping individuals flourish and find happiness. That's what he's looking for here. And so the next thing is, this isn't a complete discussion. So like I said, this is a series of lectures. So even Aristotle recognizes in his book that this isn't everything, that there is more to be discussed on these topics, and that this isn't complete in and of itself. There's definitely, he can expand upon this. Anyone could take these ideas and further them. And that the other thing is, the young are led by feelings and not reason. So this should be something that is left to the old. And so I think it's funny. I'm 25, so obviously young talking about this, but I'm not driving this. I don't think I have, and I think I've been humbled enough times in the last like 2 years of doing the podcast to recognize the fact that when I put forward ideas, they're very preliminary still at this point, and I'm still trying to uncover a good, solid understanding of the truth. I think I'm getting much better, and I think I've been knocked on my butt a few times, but we all know that, especially young people who are listening to this know that, or sorry, rather, I would say probably old people, listening to this, older, would recognize the ignorance that young people have, and that ambition that we have to seek and to be heard, but not really having much to say. And so Aristotle says this is something that should be left to the old if possible. And then in chapter 4, he says that happiness is the highest good of political science, right? That's what political science is ordered towards, is happiness. That is what it's seeking. But what is happiness? That's what he has to ask. And so we must determine what it means to actually be happy. If we're going to say that's what the end of political science is, we need to understand what that actual end is. If I say, I'm going to the beach, you might say, okay, well, what beach? Am I going to a beach in the Caribbean, on the Atlantic coast of the US, in, China, right? Where in Japan, where is this beach at? Barcelona, where is this beach? What are we talking about here? And so that's what he says. We have to determine what it is to be happy. And he says that happiness is to have been brought up in fine habits, uh, or basically, sorry, I'm having trouble reading. I'm reading my notes off my phone because I'm sharing my screen as I'm talking. And so to have been brought up in fine habits if we are to be adequate students of fine and just things. So that's what we're looking for, is these fine and just things. How do we seek these things and go about that? And we have to have the right habits in doing so. So then chapter 5, people form their understanding of the good based on the type of life they lead. That's one of his assertions, or his major assertion here. And he says that there are three major types: gratification, political activity, and study. And so gratified people are like grazing animals. They just are, they deserve to be led, even, he says, like grazing animals, right? They're the people who are just filling their base passions. Then there are people who seek the good of honor through political activity. They look for honor and respect and what goes with that. And they assume extra responsibility on top of, unlike the people who are the grazing animals, the people seeking for gratification, people seeking political office are seeking a higher good of honor and serving people, right? And so they deserve that honor. But there's something higher than this. There's something higher than that honor that comes with it. And so before he gets into what that is, he says that it's important to first know what he means by good. So some goods are for their own sake. Others lead toward another good, just like the teleology, right? Some actions lead to an end in and of itself. Some actions lead to another end, right? They're kind of a step on the way to the ultimate end. And so we cannot have a single idea about the good, because there's different types of goods. There are goods for them for the sake of themselves, and goods for the sake of other goods, right? I don't do my job to get money. I don't earn money because money's good in and of itself. I earn money so that I can support my family, so that I can use that money to buy the other goods that I need, because that's how we exchange. So normal people don't benefit from this idea of the good. Doctors aren't as worried about universal health. That's what he's talking about here, is this kind of universal good. But really, doctors aren't worried about that. They're not worried about health in general. And what is that? No, they say that they're worried about the patient that they're treating. Sorry, I'm laughing because my dog just went nuts above me. But they're worried about the patient that they're treating. They're worried about the particular good in front, the health of the person that they're treating, that discrete instance. And that's the normal way that people look at good, is what is good discreetly in these particular situations. And so in chapter 7, the highest good then is what must be that for the sake of which the other things are done. So it must be the good that all the other goods are ordered towards. That's the highest good, right? The good that is good in and of itself, and that can't lead to a better good, because if it could lead to a higher good, then it isn't the highest good. That's basically his argument. So it must be complete. It must be a full good. It must be something that incorporates all the other goods. And I know I'm using that word a lot, but uh, it is that's what he's talking about here. So it's never undertaken for the sake of something else. Like I mentioned, it has to be the highest one. Otherwise, if there's something higher, then it's not the ultimate good. And happiness seems complete because we choose it for its own sake, not for the sake of something else. Honor, pleasure, other goods make us, or we seek those because we think they'll make us happy, right? We do all these other things because we seek happiness. That is the highest human good, as far as putting aside, God right now, in this discussion, and even what you see from St. Augustine, right, is, and all of the saints, is that the goodness that you get, the reason why God is the ultimate good is because he's the one who gives you this ultimate happiness. he is all goodness. And so he is perfect goodness. So yes, that is the perfect goodness that we seek. Well, Aristotle doesn't have the Christian worldview to look at, but he was able to say this happiness is the ultimate good that we seek in life. And we must understand human beings' functions in order to understand human happiness. Because back to teleology, in order to understand what happiness is, what we are ordered towards, we have to understand ourselves. We have to understand our own nature. And our reason is what sets us apart. So our function is activity of the soul in accord with reason or requiring reason. That's how we live well. So it is making our soul, using our reason, and having an act of the will, an act of our soul to leverage our reason and attain happiness. Basically, that is what we're working towards. And then in chapter 8, we walk through how happiness requires certain external resources. So things like honor or power are make us happy, right? Being able to feed our family makes us happy. All these other goods contribute to this ultimate good of happiness, right? The more of those goods you have in your life, the better. If it generally, right? And we can look at today where we are a very spiritually deprived society, maybe, but very materially wealthy, and we see a lot of unhappiness because we are missing some of the key things that are actually probably more important to our happiness than the material things. But then again, a lack of things, like a lack of a spouse or a lack of beauty, detract from our happiness, right? If you could see this in single people who want to be married. They lack something that they want, and it is a cause for unhappiness. Now, their solid career, the other things going for them are a lack, or are contribute to happiness, but that other side of the coin is lacking goods can contribute to unhappiness. And so in chapter 9, then we say, how is happiness acquired? It could be gifted by the gods, in some sense. And I think Aristotle throws us in because, his teacher's teacher, Socrates, was killed for, um, going against the gods, basically, is what it was. But I do think there's a sense that you could say, okay, sure, maybe the gods just arbitrarily choose who will get these gifts and who will be happy based on that. But he says it is the result of virtue and some sort of learning or cultivation available to the virtuous. So what he sees, and virtue here is excellent, right? It is a attributed to people's excellence. And so we get to eventually the moral virtue that is the highest order, spoiler alert, of excellence. But there are other forms of excellence that can make you happy, right? If you don't have monetary problems or financial problems, you are going to be happier than someone, all other things equal, who does have those problems, right? If you both have a happy family or good family, all these things, you go to church, so on and so forth, and then one person gets laid off, two identical families, one person gets laid off, then the other family who's not laid off is going to be happier than the family that is, right? So there is this um, way of going about it so it's that result of virtue, that result of excellence, and not that if you get laid off you're not excellent, but you obviously have some sort of lack there now, right? You are missing one of those goods that makes you happy. And then in chapter 10, he takes this idea further. It's not only attaining complete virtue, right? Virtue is important, but one must also live a complete life. So this is sort of as opposed to a narrow or singular one, right? Instead of having this narrow focus, you need to be broad. You need to kind of be a Renaissance man almost of sorts, is what he says. You need to have this full experience of life in addition to the virtue that you have. And then in chapter 11, while some things can make us happy after death, he says, he gives the example of your children going on to do great things, or a friend, having success after you're gone. things can't make us unhappy. And so this is kind of something that, for me, to be totally honest, I still don't fully understand this diversion. And I think that if you look at the Christian worldview on things, that this may be something where it's not quite right, because either you are in the Christian worldview, you're going to heaven, and you may have to take a pit stop at purgatory on the way, but you ultimately are happy, and things can't make you sad at that point, right? You have the beatific vision, you see God for what he is, and you are reveling in perfect goodness, pure actuality, God himself. And on the other end, you know that you are going to be lacking that for all eternity. And so you can't be made happy or unhappy. You kind of have a final choice, and that's what you're set at in the afterlife. That's how at least we look at it in the Christian worldview. So we do differ, and that's another important thing is, as I'm going through this, there are differences. Most of the writers that I'm going to be talking about wrote before Christianity came about and didn't have access to that worldview, and I think might have changed some of the things that they argue for if they had. And then chapters 12 and 13 kind of get added together here. It's a little bit longer of a section, but what he says is that we need to understand virtue to understand happiness. And this is because virtue is what leads to happiness. Because first, we have to understand the nature of the soul, which has both rational and non-rational parts. Or rather, I should say, virtue is what leads to happiness because it is the highest form of excellence, right? And so we have to understand, in order to understand that, we have to understand the nature of the soul, which has both the rational and non-rational parts. Our non-rational parts share in reason because our desires and our appetites do have just causes, right? If you're hungry, there is a good mechanism for that because it leads towards us eating, and that is a good. We need to nourish ourselves. If you have a sexual desire, that is somewhat rational because you want to procreate the species. There is a urge there for that is rational, or that is reasonable, I should say, but they're not fully rational in how Aristotle talks about it. Whereas our rationality is that ability to think through things logically and to really understand. And so he says that the difference in parts of the soul create different types of virtues. So these are probably the easier way to understand the difference between the rational and non-rational. So the virtues of the rational side are things like wisdom, understanding, prudence, whereas the virtues of character, as he calls them, but kind of the virtues of overcoming the non-rational side or ordering that towards virtue, are generosity or temperance, right? So quelling your pleasures and your passions and ordering them towards what is virtuous. And that will conclude book 1. And so I'll be back here soon with a little bit of a discussion on book 2. Hopefully I'll figure out some kinks now that I've done this once, and we can continue to improve these courses because I think it is good. But if you watch this and you like it, definitely buy the rest of the course. And if you've already bought it and you're just watching this now, head on over to lesson 2 and keep it rolling, because I think this is a very important thing for us to do, to educate ourselves in the classics and really learn them and understand them, and not just breeze through them to say we read them, but to really take in what they say. So thank you for tuning in. If you haven't, definitely buy the course. Just go to conversationofourgeneration.com/courses to see where you can buy it. And if you've already bought it, keep on diving in deeper and further. And thank you for tuning into this episode, or this class on the conversation of our generation. Let's get the dialogue going, and I'll see you in the next course.